Okay, I believe we will be starting in about a minute. Hopefully everyone can hear properly, is well connected, and we have no technical difficulties today. All right, so a big welcome to everyone that has joined us today. This is a very special day for us, for both the Pixel and the GeoUrban project. We are hosting here the first Pixel workshop, second GeoUrban event. We, of course, wanted to have this event happening live, in person, meeting people, greeting you, sharing coffee with you. But the situation has made us pivot a bit things, and we have decided to move into this virtual meeting, which has, of course, its drawbacks, but it has also several advantages. So among them, of course, we can gather many people here. I mean, we have 180 registrations for today's event, which is a huge number, and we are very happy for that. We can hopefully enjoy as well this live translation, which is a first for me. It's my first experience with this format. Hopefully, you have no difficulties with this, and you can follow the event the whole morning. So let me also thank the committee that has been working very hard for this to happen. This includes from BSC, Rose Gregorio, Emilia Becerro, from Paula Vinia, Emmanuel Robbins, Nicolas Gontier, and from Geoplat, Paloma Perez, Margarita de Gregorio. A big thanks to all of you for making this possible. Today, day one, we are going to discuss the status of geothermal in the EU and large-scale projects. We will have a follow-up event tomorrow. This starts at 9:30 or has started at 9:30 and will last until about 12. So the idea here is that we will have for you available a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully you can reach it and you can use that to make questions for the panelists. We will filter them out. And if there is sufficient time, let's say, we will try to convey those questions to the panelists so that they can answer your whatever questions you might have. Bear in mind you have the interpretation button, which you can choose any of the three languages provided. And in principle, you should be able to follow the whole event in your preferred language. We should have 1-2 minutes for questions, probably. If we find that we are exceeding the amount, let's say, of participants, I mean, this format, this Zoom format allows only for up to 100 simultaneous participants. We have also enabled a YouTube channel where this event can be followed live. So that is, of course, an alternative. Bear in mind that we are recording this event. That is not a problem for all attendees because we are not, you cannot, let's say, speak up, or you cannot share, let's say, your image with your camera. But whenever we go into the last stage of the event and we have an open session, bear in mind that we are recording this, and hopefully we will share the video in a future stage. So that is I guess the introduction about this event. I mean, of course, I guess we all gathered here today because we have a shared interest in geothermal energy. This is an energy which should probably be taking a major role in the future in Europe and worldwide. And we believe that we need still, let's say, to work on its, let's say, on its spread, let's say, at least in our part in the European territory. There are many difficulties for this. We know them well. We will discuss them today with the panelists. But geothermal energy should be, let's say, a key, fundamental piece towards decarbonization, towards reducing pollution, towards eventually reverting climate change. It's a huge complement to other technologies such as solar and wind, which provide high throughput, but let's say are more susceptible to changes, let's say, throughout the times of the day. In Europe, we do have, let's say, a mandate towards, let's say, decarbonization, electric mobility. Geothermal has to be a huge part of this. We have a big history in Europe in, let's say, in subsurface exploration, in developing technologies to that goal. So I guess that we should exploit that and bring those huge, successful ideas that we have had or used in the past for other purposes towards the field of geothermal energy. That is one of the big, let's say, concepts behind both projects supporting today's workshop, GeoUrban and Pixel, and hopefully you will see some examples in the following presentations. So you have in the website the schedule for today's event. They are short talks, 1 to 2 minutes for questions. So as time is, let's say, not a lot, I will start with the first talk. So I'll try to share my screen now here. Hopefully you can see properly my screen. So I'm going to present very briefly the Pixel project, which is an Interreg type of project funded by Feather funds, whose goal is to establish a transnational network, okay, to improve geothermal exploration. So of all problems related to geothermal, we will focus on exploring the subsurface, finding the best possible sites, let's say, to exploit geothermal energy. And to do that, we will use R&D, or we are using R&D, and essentially these core technologies: geophysics, mathematics, computation, okay? The idea here, of course, is sustaining, let's say, or improving the sustainability for the whole region, which is, let's say, the target of this project, this type of funding, okay? We are halfway through the project now. We are we have concluded the first year. This is the list of partners that we have. As you can see, I mean, they are basically in Barcelona, in Bilbao, and in Po. And they include R&D institutions, SMEs, or poles, let's say, for every kind of, let's say, of activity related to the geology, let's say, of the subsurface. Together with the partners, we have this user board, the associate partners, which are mostly SMEs, and also a platform which provides connection with, let's say, the ecosystem of geothermal in Spain, which spreads beyond the territory of this POCTEFA project, but it's meant to be, let's say, our exploitation target within the project. The strategy is very simple and one that has been outlined many times. So we have to, or we want to, let's say, develop technologies which tackle problems in geothermal exploration. This will be mostly done by R&D centers, which their ideas will hopefully convey into prototypes, software prototypes, which gather those ideas, this innovation. These prototypes might be standard programs or might be high-performance computing programs, which can scale up and solve very large problems very quickly. And then we have SMEs, which will evaluate the tech and hopefully be able to exploit those technologies in, let's say, in their day-to-day activities. Now, I'm going to go very quickly through several of the examples of technologies already developed within the context of the project. This one, it has been developed by Real-Time Seismic, and it's targeting savings in data acquisition and processing. By means of using less seismic sources to explore the subsurface, they can reduce a lot the cost of both the data acquisition and the, let's say, further data processing associated to those surveys which are essential, let's say, to characterize the subsurface. This is already in place for several projects. Also, Real-Time Seismic now collaborating with INRIA. They are developing novel imaging technology for seismic waves. Essentially, they use simulation of seismic waves to produce new models of the subsurface, which can capture structures which are, let's say, not possible to see with standard geophysical technologies. We also have room for deep learning. In this case, this is an example by BECAM. This institution is working hard, not only, let's say, in the analysis of data, but also in replacing our simulators and our inversion simulators. Like in this case, you have an example where you have this drilling machine, which has this trajectory crossing several different geological structures. And this deep learning analog is able to, around, let's say, the trajectory of this drilling mechanism, can provide correct answers about the properties of the subsurface. And it can do this very quickly, almost in real time. We are also developing new software for electromagnetic surveys, also very important for geothermal energy. We can tackle structures which are very small, thanks to these unstructured meshes and high performance computing. This allows us to, for example, to model things such as the casing of a borehole, which are very important in let's say, in interpreting let's say, the response, electromagnetic response of the subsoil. We are also working, and this is very important, into, let's say, making sense of all the geophysical data that we can collect and process. This results in models which have to be, let's say, put together with geological know-how of the areas of study. And we try to add also the hydrogeological concepts so that we have a model which makes sense about everything related to the, let's say, to the area of study. Like in here, you have this one in Valles. This is a shared study area with the GeoUrban project. You might hear later James McAteer talk a little bit more about this region. But essentially, we want to have a representation which is comprehensive about how, let's say, the fluids circulate and are warmed up in these environments. Okay, this allows us also to develop test models for future, let's say, evaluation. Several examples of geophysical models, in this case, resistivity models of the subsurface. If we want them to be, let's say, valuable for geothermal studies, we have to map those, let's say, into models such as geothermal models, much more actionable, let's say, by the community of geothermal. Okay. We have several achievements. We are very happy to see transfer of technology. We are happy to see that we are demonstrating savings in actual geophysical exploration. We are following the principles of equality and sustainable development, and we are looking forward to collaborate with local industry and other European projects, all of them related to geothermal. So in case you want to know more about the project, you can have a look at the website. You can contact us anytime. We will be very happy to give you any further information. And you can follow us, of course, in our Twitter account for news. So I just hope that you enjoyed the workshop today, that you have a very good experience. Let me thank again the institutions which have made this possible, Avinia, BSC, and GeoPlat. And yeah, hopefully you can have a good experience today. So let me pass the mic now to James McAteer, which will complement the information with his takes from the GeoUrban project.
Hello. Thanks, Joseph. Can everyone hear me yet?
We hear you well. We don't see your screen.
Lovely. Well, welcome everyone. I'll reiterate what Joseph said, and thank you all for joining this morning. I'm going to give a quick overview of the GeoUrban project, which has been ongoing now for 2.5 years, and I'll just go through the basics of what we were setting out to achieve. I guess the combination of the Pixel and GeoUrban project this morning and over the next 2 days is founded in the geophysical surveys and the geophysical work that's been going on in Spain, and in the case of the GeoUrban project, also in Dublin. So the overall objectives were to look at collecting new data in these urban areas of Dublin and Valais, just north of Barcelona, as well as looking at some of the policy and legislation in place in both of these regions, and how that's maybe helping or hindering the development of geothermal. So we're looking at both the kind of the physical barriers as well as these more administrative side of development. The consortium includes 10 partners from 3 different countries. I should also say, sorry, this is funded through the Geothermica Eranet co-fund. So these partners come from Ireland, Spain, and Denmark. I've listed them out here. It's a mix of SMEs, academic institutes, local councils, the national geothermal associations in both cases. And our partner from Denmark, GeoOp, is an industry established partner who's working on geothermal installations in Denmark. So a good experience there for more immature markets that we see in Dublin and Spain. A slide on motivation. I think this might be preaching to the converted slightly, but I guess in terms of GeoUrban, we're looking at low entropy resources. So it's very much targeting the heat sector. And for example, in Ireland, that accounts for nearly 40% of our total energy expenditure. So when tackling the overall energy mix, focusing on heat and geothermal can really help progress us towards our overall EU targets. I guess the specific objectives for each location are looking at developing new conceptual models. You saw some maps of Valais there that Joseph put up. Understanding these regions better, the geology. I guess both of the regions are characterized by a general lack of deep onshore data. I don't think either region was ever explored for oil and gas in the past. So unlike areas in France and the Netherlands, we don't have that deep geological data set that you'd see. On top of that, we're just looking at promoting geothermal for use in district heating. So in the case for Dublin, we've included Dublin City Council as a cooperation partner. So they've come on board, they're learning about geothermal. They're also installing a district heating network across Dublin at the moment. So getting them involved and aware of geothermal in this project has been really useful. And then I guess finally, we're looking at geothermal feasibility study, and that comes back to the policy and legislation side of stuff. So having GeoOp on board as a partner from Denmark, where geothermal for district heating is an established technology and it's used widely over there. Having them on board to look at the mechanisms in place in these two regions has been really useful. Again, geothermal for district heating, I don't think I need to go through that too much, but essentially these are two low entropy regions that we're looking at. I think the Valais side of things is not slightly, but much more warmer waters than we see in Dublin. But both categorized as low entropy and therefore targeting this district heating under this project. For that purpose, we're looking at matching favorable geologies with a high heat demand. So we're looking at areas where you have a heat demand, exploring the geology and looking for that geothermal resource. So see here, I've said it's a sliding scale between volume and temperature, as well as permeability and depth. And that has to be matched with a heat demand. So both of these regions are characterized by secondary porosity, and we're exploring those reservoirs more with these techniques. Here's just an example of kind of the heat demand matched with some potentially higher temperature waters. So I think some people might laugh when they see the 16.3 degrees, but in terms of groundwater in Dublin, this is somewhere between 50 and 60% greater in temperature than typical groundwater measurements. So that's actually a warm spring, would you believe? So again, this is highlighting matching favorable geological conditions with a high heat demand for the use of geothermal as district heating. I guess specifically for GeoUrban, we're looking at carrying out geophysical surveys. So we've carried out passive seismic in both areas across Dublin. There was 20 passive seismic stations put out across the entire city. And then we saw the exploration in the Valais region as well. So we've undertaken these passive and control source EM. Can you see my screen? Sorry.
Actually not. We don't see your slides, but I mean, I was not sure whether you needed them. In any case, you have 1 minute left, so I mean, if
okay.
you can maybe wrap up.
In that case, I'll just reiterate that the GeoUrban project was looking at novel geophysical techniques, so the passive seismic network, along with some controlled source electromagnetics in both the Dublin and Valais region. And then we're, I guess, helping that kind of geophysical exploration with looking at the policy and legislation behind the development of geothermal in both areas as well. So trying to boost the development of geothermal through exploration and legislative means in two immature markets in Dublin and Valais in Spain. So please contact me if anyone has any more questions, or we'll be wrapping up the project in the coming months. So hopefully you'll see more data and the final outputs from the project. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone enjoys the next 2 days.
Thank you very much, James. I mean, it was really interesting to hear about the developments of the project. Let me remind everybody that you can write your questions in the Q&A. I mean, other people will not see them, so they're really private. I mean, we will filter them out in case you need to convey some questions to the panelists. Just very quickly, James, I mean, quick question. I mean, what do you think is the biggest, let's say, hurdle right now, the biggest problem towards, let's say, to having a bigger geothermal presence in, let's say, in your area, around Dublin? What is the biggest problem, if you would have to summarize it in one?
Geological data, I think. It's kind of two-pronged. It's the geological data, and we don't have a legislation in place for the development. So our geological survey here has recently released a policy and legislation review, and they're pushing that forward now to hopefully have a legislation in place for the development of geothermal by the end of 2022, I believe they've said. But on top of that, we need to push the exploration. There was never any onshore oil and gas exploration in Dublin or in Ireland in general. So we're relying on old mineral exploration well logs with some seismic, but really the depth we're looking at for geothermal, the data isn't there currently. So projects like this, where we're using alternate techniques to gather extra data, have been really useful in, I guess, pointing future exploration in the right direction. So those would be the two biggest barriers I see.
Okay, so thank you very much for your contribution and for your answer. So
Thank you.
we can move to the next talk. I mean, I suggest that we already, I will introduce Philippe Dimas very briefly. You may already share your slides. I mean, you can use the time when I'm introducing, so that we can make sure that your slides are up in place. So I mean, we have the honor of having here today Philippe Dimas with us, who is the General Secretary of the European Geothermal Energy Council. I mean, he's a very active person in the geothermal scene in Europe. He is working in many projects, among them the GeoEnergy Europe, which is aiming at the internationalization of the geothermal skills of Europe or European SMEs, together also with Paul Lavinia and Geoplat. So a big welcome to our guest today, Philippe. The floor is yours. We see your screen, but like in two blocks.
Yes, thank you. Yes, in two blocks. Oh,
yeah. I guess that the other screen that you're sharing. I mean, we can read it, but you might. That's perfect. Thank you.
Better?
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, thank you, Josep, for a kind introduction. Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I will not be long. In 15 minutes, I will try to brief a bit the situation of where we are in geothermal and where we should be. As it was nicely said before, indeed, we have a good, big potential. We can develop much more, but what exactly is our potential? For that, last year, we launched a concept in EJEC. It's that the next 10 years will be the geothermal decade. Really? Can we make a geothermal decade the next 10 years? Let's see what is feasible. I will be brief on EJEC. It was reintroduced by Josep. Indeed, we are the European Geothermal Association representing the stakeholders all over Europe. What are the current market trends? When we speak of decade, we need to know where we are today and what are the trends. Some figure from, not last year, from 2 years ago, just for information, every year we release the geothermal market report. For 2020, we are currently collecting the data. It will be able spring 2021. So look at what the situation before in 2019. Currently, we have 130 geothermal power plants installed. Main markets, Turkey, Italy, Iceland. We have 2 gigawatt thermal installed of geothermal heating system beyond district heating, mainly district heating in some countries, but beyond. In Netherlands, for example, greenhouses. For district heating, it represents today 300 geothermal district heating systems installed. Not to forget, we have 2 million geothermal heat pumps installed in Europe. As we see in Europe, we have these constraints that you are dealing with of the geology. But what is the main constraint we have is that we don't really know the potential. So it's not something I will develop here today, but it's nice that in PeakSeed you will work on that, because what we know is that we have a huge potential for high temperature, for medium temperature, for low temperature. But what we know is that in many areas, lack of exploration, lack of drilling campaigns makes that we are not aware of the full potential. Anyway, we see that the market is developing. And what is interesting is that although we have some plants already in operation, 150, we can double this number in 10 years. What I say, not more, because we know for electricity, the time for development is 6 to 8 years. It takes time. So all the plants, if the one we have currently under investigation and are successful within 10 years, we will double the number. So indeed, we could say for electricity, it will be a nice decade if we can do that. But we have some constraints in electricity. The first constraint is that the electricity demand in Europe is stagnating. So we will not see that as a factor of opportunities for developing our technologies, where we know that in many countries in Europe, you have already overcapacity. The main challenge we will have to do is to contribute to the decarbonization of the power sector, so to replace current assets. And here you could see from all countries in Europe, a large part is still dominated with fossil fuel. So we know that in these areas, in these countries, there will be the potential development of geothermal for electricity production. I will come back to this topic later when we speak about replacement of fossil fuel assets. For district heating, the situation is much more favorable. We could say that it's really nice. For deep geothermal, for heating and cooling, we have 300 systems, but we can multiply by 10 the number of systems. We can have more than 2,000 to 3,000 systems in Europe by 2030. The boom is there, and you will understand later why we say that we can do that. We can do that firstly, because the potential we know, we've already have in mind that we are not fully aware of the full potential, but with the current data we have, we know that geothermal could potentially cover 25% of the EU population for heating and cooling. And you can see, notably, you in Spain and also South of France, it's not that there's no potential, is we mainly lack data on how we can embrace all this potential. So we need more exploration, we need more drilling for knowing this potential. But already, with existing data, we say that we can cover 25% of the population. And we have a big focus today in Europe, is notably for Central and Eastern Europe and some of our countries, replacement of coal power plants. But when we say coal power plants, we speak mainly about coal power and heat plant, cogeneration plants, and the heat part, it's a huge challenge because we speak about huge capacity, 100 megawatt or more for a power plant, thermal, for coal power plants. So here, geothermal heating will be one of the contributors for the replacement and the transition. Now, if we look at a bit some market segments in Europe, and here it's the main point we have always to highlight in geothermal electricity. Of course, we are going to more flexible market, flexible production, but geothermal, we are baseload. And we are not baseload, we are the best baseload technology. We are best than nuclear. And it should be always remind to everybody that geothermal power plants, and we see, for example, the one installed for many years in Italy, many of them, they run 100% a year. So 84% is the average for the Italian power plants from Enel, but many of them run 100% a year. It's important for electricity, it's important also for heating and cooling, and it's important when we speak about supply energy for the industry. A lot of industry, they don't need only high temperature, they mainly need baseload. And something maybe we forget to have in mind, geothermal, we are more than just a source of energy for electricity and cooling. We are also contributing to the local economic development because we have some key advantages. What we need in geothermal, it's one aspect, is, okay, we are baseload. We need to have a better functioning drilling market in Europe. We know that this market is not fluid enough. There's not enough rigs, competition and rigs available all over Europe. I speak on an average situation. In some areas, in some countries, it's maybe not right, but in general, we need to have that. A contrario, for the turbines, we see that there's a good competition, and this competition has led to two aspects: a better efficiency and a a price reduction in countries. So you could see there's a huge competition. We are speaking about dozens of manufacturers, especially for binary systems. Why for binary? Because today the main trend for electricity is not today, it's for the last 10 years in Europe, is binary systems. Last year we did a report, and I really encourage you to read the report, because in this slide is just a summary about what are the wells profiles in Europe. And you can see country per country, what are the average depths for the wells in Europe. We have done that for electricity, and we have done that for heating and cooling, what are the average depths of the different wells, country per country. I will not go to the details. It's quite interesting to go to the details in the market report. It's available in our website. What is a new topic, and we need to do that because if we want to be successful in this decade and to develop all these projects, we need to be sure that the supply chain is there. And it's here today where we put a focus us on the supply chain is on the key materials needed for geothermal. We need to have them available, but available with a good price. And it's all the question of security of the raw materials. I will conclude on this market segment with which is the new high topic in Europe and for geothermal is electrification of the transport sector. It's batteries for us. It's this lithium opportunity. So geothermal lithium today, it's an ongoing global race between mainly Europe, Oceania, and North America. But we see that there are other also stakeholders interested to develop geothermal lithium production. For the moment, it's just starting. We need to have a development of technology. We understand that the technology readiness level is 6 to 7, but if we want to be market ready, we need this maturity to go to commercial readiness level of 8 to 9. So we hope by 1 year, next year, to see really the first commercial development of geothermal lithium. It's quite promising, but let's embrace this challenge all together. To do these challenges and to realize this geothermal decade, we'll need also the nice Green Deal. Also here, I cannot go to all the details because when we speak about legislation, policy at European level, it's a lot of initiative, legislation and financial opportunities. I try to sum up in one slide the different bubbles, but as you can see, it's a lot of topics. I invite you to visit the GEC website. For each topic, you have some more information. Why you could see from my intervention that I'm enthusiastic and we launched the concept of geothermal decade. It's because we have some good news to report already today. The good news is for poor cost. So it's not the case for all plants, especially for the new innovative demonstration plants, but for mature markets, when we speak about Italy, when we speak about Iceland, the LCOE is competitive with other sources of energy. On top of that, it's the base load factor. So if you can provide already a competitive source of energy with a base load factor for electricity, we see that in mature markets, I would say mature markets, it's really promising. Even more promising is the report from France from last year, the geothermal district heating, but also some geothermal systems in shallow aquifers are already competitive. Not competitive, are the most affordable source of heating and cooling. With 15 euro per megawatt hour, geothermal district heating in Paris basins is today in France 3 to 4 times cheaper than the gas boilers. We don't speak, but in 20 years, we speak today. We are already one of the most competitive sources of heating and cooling. It's why we say that we can multiply by 10 the number of systems with the proper conditions because we are already here to have not only an energy transition, but an affordable energy transition. For that, of course, we'll need novel technologies, we'll need research and innovation. Here, I just do a promotion of one platform, which is the European Technology and Innovation Platform on deep geothermal energy. It's free, it's open to all stakeholders, researchers, industry, but also public entities involved in research and innovation. I will encourage you to contribute to these activities. You can see we do not only technical activities, but also non-technical activities like economic, social, and environmental assessment. Why I would say that geothermal...
Philippe, only 1 minute left, please, if you can wrap up.
I know. It's more or less my last slide because I will not go to the last part where I see that is the main topic for the roundtable later. So I will be brief and conclude on that. it's really what we have, probably a message we have to bring is geothermal is more than a source of energy. Geothermal, we are able to contribute to the decarbonization of the buildings for heating, cooling, and hot water, all kinds of buildings. With geothermal heat pumps, it can be installed anywhere. With underground thermal energy storage, we are also able to provide this flexibility to the heating and cooling demand. With geothermal district heating, we can have a huge and fast decarbonization of the cities. We have also to do much more for decarbonizing the industry. We see that in industry, too much we focus on high temperature energy intensive industry, where indeed it's high temperature for us. Maybe we are not able to reach this temperature with heating and cooling, maybe with electricity, but for the rest, for the majority of the processes at medium and low temperature, we are able, especially today with large heat pumps, to provide this baseload supply to industry. And of course, in electricity, the baseload concept, the grid balancing, and more also the flexible dispatchable generation that we will see coming will be source of opportunity, without forgetting to mention geothermal lithium, where we hope it will attract interest for our sector, notably for more exploration, for better understanding of the resource to achieve this decade properly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Philippe. It was very exciting presentation. Just for the sake of time, I would ask the next speaker, Luis, to prepare the slides, and I will introduce him very briefly. Thank you very much. We have some questions. We will put them to the panel discussion at the end. I think I really have to thank the optimism that you have brought to today's event. I mean, that's not so frequent, let's say, in this field. So thank you very much, Philippe. Hopefully you can stay with us for the open discussion at the end of today's event. En este momento voy a cambiar de idioma, voy a hablar en español para presentar a nuestro nuevo ponente.
Buenos días.
Buenos días, Luis.
Quería en primer lugar disculpar a mi compañera Carmen López Ocón, la jefa del Departamento de Hidroeléctrico, Energías del Mar y Geotermia del IDAE, que era quien estaba previsto que diera esta ponencia y que por problemas de última hora pues no ha podido venir. Quiero hablar del impulso al desarrollo de la geotermia en España en el marco de la política europea y española de energías renovables. Vamos a ver. En primer lugar, me gustaría hacer una mención al contexto internacional, empezando por el Acuerdo de París, cuando en diciembre del año 2015 cerca de 200 países establecieron un objetivo de reducción, de control del aumento de la temperatura para que no pasara en ningún caso de los 2 grados centígrados con arreglo a las épocas preindustriales y con el esfuerzo de intentar que ese aumento de la temperatura quedara limitado como mucho a 1,5 grados centígrados. Posteriormente, en el año 2016, se aprobó el paquete de invierno de la Comisión Europea con una serie de objetivos vinculantes de reducción de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, de desarrollo de las energías renovables y de eficiencia energética. Hay que hablar también de la estrategia de la Comisión Europea para una Europa climáticamente neutra en 2050, que se aprobó en el año 2018, a finales de 2018, y que confirma el compromiso de la Unión Europea y presenta una visión para conseguir esa neutralidad. Más recientemente, el Pacto Verde Europeo, aprobado en diciembre de 2019, propone la transformación de la economía de la Unión Europea con miras a un futuro sostenible. Por otro lado, el Plan del Objetivo Climático para 2030, aprobado en septiembre de 2020, propone un aumento de la ambición climática de tal forma que se consiga una reducción de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero de al menos el 55% en el año 2030 con respecto a las emisiones que había en 1990. Esto supone un importante aumento, ya que hasta entonces el compromiso de la Unión Europea era de reducción de las emisiones en un 40%. Y finalmente, la reunión del Consejo Europeo del 10 y el 11 de diciembre de 2020 ha refrendado ese objetivo vinculante de la Unión Europea para 2030 de reducir las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero al menos un 55%. Por lo que se refiere a España, el contexto del desarrollo de la política de energía y clima, hay que mencionar al menos estas cuatro patas de la política, que son, en primer lugar, el Plan Nacional Integrado de Energía y Clima 2021-2030, PNIEC. Por otro lado, el Proyecto de Ley de Cambio Climático y Transición Energética. Por otro lado, la Estrategia de Transición Justa. Y, finalmente, la estrategia a largo plazo para una economía española moderna, competitiva y climáticamente neutra en 2050. Todo ello apunta hacia una descarbonización de la economía, a una penetración masiva de las energías renovables y a un sector eléctrico 100% renovable. Estas son algunas de las herramientas para conseguir caminar en esa dirección. Aquí aparecen ya algunas de las políticas que aparecían en la transparencia anterior y otras herramientas que se están utilizando para llevar a cabo la política, como la puesta en marcha de las hojas de ruta, por ejemplo, el hidrógeno verde, que pretenden definir la estrategia nacional en determinadas materias clave para el desarrollo de las políticas climáticas y de energía. Estos son los objetivos de España señalados por el Plan Nacional Integrado de Energía y Clima y por la Estrategia de Descarbonización para los años 2030 y 2050 respectivamente. En cuanto a la reducción de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, el Plan Nacional Integrado de Energía y Clima, el PNIEC, se plantea un objetivo de reducción de las emisiones del 23% con respecto a las del año 1990 y una reducción de emisiones del 90% en el año 2050, al menos. En cuanto a la energía final de origen renovable, el PNIEC se plantea un objetivo para el año 2030 de que el 42% de toda la energía final consumida en España sea de origen renovable y en el año 2050 que ese porcentaje alcance el 100%. En cuanto a la electricidad renovable, el PNIEC se plantea un objetivo para el año 2030 de que el 74% de la electricidad generada en España sea de este origen, de origen renovable. Esto es un crecimiento verdaderamente importante, teniendo en cuenta que en los últimos años andamos alrededor del 40%, que también es una buena participación. Y se pretende que la electricidad de origen renovable cubra el 100%. Las fuentes de energía renovables cubran el 100% de la electricidad generada en el año 2050. En cuanto a la eficiencia energética, el objetivo para el año 2030 es que mejore en un 39,5%. El Consejo Europeo del 10 y el 11 de diciembre, como decía, refrendó el objetivo de aumento de esa ambición climática para que al menos un 55%, para que al menos se consiga una reducción de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero en el año 2030 de un 55% con respecto a los valores del año 1990. Esto que para muchos países va a suponer una revisión de los planes nacionales integrados de energía y clima, los PNIEC, de tal manera que los objetivos de sus planes estén en línea con esos nuevos objetivos, con esa nueva ambición. En el caso de España, tal y como reconoció la Comisión Europea, los objetivos del PNIEC ya están en línea con esos nuevos objetivos, por lo cual se mantienen los hasta ahora establecidos. Bien, para cumplir con el objetivo de reducción de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, como decía, las energías renovables se plantea que aumenten en el año 2030 hasta un 42%. Aquí se ve la evolución desde el año 2015 hasta ese año 2030. Es un aumento muy fuerte y esta es la evolución esperada en el escenario objetivo de la generación de electricidad con energías renovables, hasta llegar a una potencia instalada de alrededor de 120.000 megavatios en el año 2030, lo que supone prácticamente doblar la actual potencia instalada. Esto supone, ya digo, un aumento de 59 gigavatios de nueva capacidad, sobre todo fotovoltaica y eólica, y se estima un desarrollo de nuevo almacenamiento de 6 gigavatios en ese mismo periodo. Bien, en cuanto a los objetivos de la energía geotérmica para producción de electricidad en el PNIEC, el actual PNIEC no define unos objetivos específicos de geotermia. Hay un apartado que son las otras energías en las que se incluye la geotermia y las energías del mar. Conjuntamente se estima que la potencia instalada de estas dos energías puede llegar a 40 megavatios en el año 2025 y a 80 megavatios en el año 2030. En el borrador anterior del PNIEC sí se diferenciaba entre la energía geotérmica y las energías del mar. Para la energía geotérmica había un objetivo de, una estimación de crecimiento hasta 25 megavatios en el año 2025 y hasta 50 megavatios en el año 2030. Hay que tener en cuenta que esto no son objetivos limitativos, son estimaciones de por dónde puede ir la evolución de las distintas áreas, pero la evolución real va a depender del desarrollo del sector y de la evolución de costes. Aquí en esta gráfica se muestra para el escenario tendencial y para el escenario objetivo la evolución prevista de las energías renovables en aplicaciones de redes de distrito de calor y frío entre el año 2020 y el año 2030. Y en cuanto a los marcos de apoyo actuales a las energías renovables, hay que señalar que, en primer lugar, se han puesto en marcha una serie de convocatorias de ayudas a energías renovables eléctricas y térmicas, cuyas bases se establecen en estas dos órdenes, la orden TED 765 de 2020 para las renovables térmicas y la orden TED 766 para las renovables eléctricas. Se han publicado hasta la fecha 14 convocatorias eléctricas con un total de 110,8 millones de euros asociados y 13 convocatorias térmicas con un total de 136,1 millones de euros. Aquí están las comunidades autónomas afectadas. Y en esta transparencia se incluyen las actuaciones en geotermia dentro de esas convocatorias que acabo de mencionar. Hay un total de 11 comunidades autónomas en donde las convocatorias recogen la posibilidad de desarrollar con este tipo de ayudas, cofinanciados con fondos FEDER, reconocen la posibilidad de desarrollar proyectos de geotermia de acuerdo con estos límites y especificaciones que aparecen en la tabla.
Estimado Luis,
por otro lado,
solo tenemos un minutito más, nada más para...
La crisis económica derivada de la crisis sanitaria del COVID-19 ha hecho poner en marcha el plan de recuperación, transformación y resiliencia para tratar de luchar contra los daños tan graves causados en la salud y en la economía. Y se pretende hacer una reforma estructural para lograr un crecimiento sostenible e inclusivo. Se definen 10 políticas palanca para llevar a cabo estas actuaciones, 2 de las cuales tienen que ver con el sector de la energía y del clima, el sector de energía y del clima, y en particular la política 3 de transición energética justa e inclusiva es donde más actuaciones hay en el ámbito de las energías renovables.
Disculpa, Luis.
Aquí hay algunas de las actuaciones que serán necesarias poner en marcha. Desarrollar infraestructuras eléctricas inteligentes, un desarrollo muy importante del almacén.
Disculpad, pero por motivos de agenda tenemos que movernos a la siguiente reunión. Creo que Luis no puede escucharnos ahora mismo. Me sabe muy mal tener que parar su charla, pero creo que es necesario que nos movamos a la siguiente reunión. So, Emmanuel, are you around?
Aquí están algunas de las reformas e inversiones a poner en marcha, algunos de los instrumentos para su aplicación y, finalmente, algunos retos que se derivan para el sector en el desarrollo de estas políticas. Muchas gracias y buenos días.
Muchas gracias, Luis. We're moving straight to the next talk. Emmanuel, please, if you can introduce our next speaker. Emmanuel, are you around?
Ah, ok, sorry, I lost you. Oui, bonjour. On va passer à la prochaine présentation qui est de Paul Bonnet-Blanc, qui est Policy Officer au ministère de la Transition écologique en France et qui travaille au département de l'énergie et du climat sur les sujets de CCUS et d'énergie géothermique et qui va nous présenter l'aspect français de la partie géothermique. Paul, c'est à vous.
Bonjour à tous. Hello everyone and buenos dias. You can hear me and see my screen?
Very well, I think.
Okay.
On voit l'ensemble des slides. Il faudrait peut-être modifier la présentation, s'il vous plaît.
Okay.
Parfait. Merci.
So I will briefly introduce the French context and also talk about what we are doing with our EU colleagues. Well, I'm a policy officer in particular for geothermal energy at the Ministry for an Ecological Transition, which is more specifically in a department called DG Energy and Climate. I will briefly go through this, try to describe briefly the result-driven policy we are trying to implement in France. Explain about how geothermal energy is considered. We have 3 different types, and also talk about supports we want to put in place to achieve our targets in this 3 different type of geothermal energy. One is shallow, so typically in France is above 200 meters and is limited to a certain amount of energy we drive. We have a deep we add before 2 deep targets, low temperature and high temperature, and I will explain a little bit later. So briefly, the context, well, we have our specific context and we know that EU are the targets and everything. So that's the latest targets and they will be, of course, updated and also targets will be increased probably in a near future. And more specifically, in our French context, you see the part of renewable, which is, let's say, decent, but still is a bit a small chunk of everything. So the targets to carbon neutrality is at stake, and it's very important. What I want to see, I want to show here is the fact that you don't see geothermal in renewable energy. This is part of it is in other, and part is in heat pumps. But more importantly, that's let's say the national targets where you don't see geothermals, at least for in the energy mix perspective. But when you look at our targets into heat source and everything, you start to see geothermal energy, and in the left, and we're talking about geothermal heat pumps. So let's say in our national context, this is not minimal. We start to see, and especially talking about heat, we have geothermal and also part of geothermal in heat pumps targets that are at stake. So, like I said, more specifically for renewable heat, even there is a massive amount of energy at stake in France. You have some specific targets, and here when we detail, this is not specific for geothermal. When we detail the targets, you see that deep geothermal energy and geothermal heat pump are mentioned in our national policy documents. Well, now talking more specifically about geothermal, we have different. We had different targets. They were updated, but like I said, we have three different areas. One is a shallow and low temperature, which generates the most of the amount of energy, and as here it's the installed capacity. We have heat. When we call heat production is except heat pump is direct use. It's deep geothermal, and we had also electricity for mainland France. So all this is mainland France, but I will explain a little bit. Might be confusing sometimes. Our targets to achieve this is a simplification of legal framework whenever it's possible. It's also the evolution. We achieved this last year of the regulatory framework for deep geothermal, and of course we still rely on supports. So there are kind of both two types of supports, I would say. One is the research and investment in innovation, and the other is more on the day-to-day basis for the energy production. Again, these three different types explain a little bit. We have the shallow. So what we try for the shallow is to have some kind of for let's say smaller installation, less than 200 meter deep. We start to have a simplified administrative procedure to install such installation in for buildings. We also reshuffle a little bit the deep geothermal. We previously had low temperature, so typically below 150 degrees to produce heat, direct heat for a district heating system, and we had a high temperature. Now this target, I mean this level, this difference is not so, is not in our policy. It's more a context of where we know what the geological context is, so we can go. I mean, the operator can go fast and make exploration a simplified procedure and drive and drill directly, and another, let's say, context where we need further investment and a longer term exploration. When you see the curves, and this is the heat pump, but you have the same for everything. We had increase at the beginning, and then it's like a kind of a plateau. Unfortunately, I mean, the thing is the pace is not as good as it should be. And also, I didn't put the targets, but we really need to achieve our targets to increase by 6 to 10 for deep geothermal heat. And the same thing, and probably at a smaller pace for heat pumps. So we really need massification and scaling up for some installation to achieve our targets. A little bit of what we have in France for deep geothermal. So when I say massification or scaling up, we of course we have satisfactory targets achieved in the Paris Basin and in southwest of France. But when you see, except some developments in Alsace and somewhere else, but it's I would say the not on the bright side, that it's kind of empty. So we try to work on that and to have, whenever it's possible, and when Philippe Dumas showed the map, we have some potential heat source, and we need to try to harness this heat. This is the figures. I will go briefly. This is figures, but you see the majority is coming from the Paris Basin, and it's just as exemplified by the map I showed earlier. This is for electricity, or electricity and heat combined. So in mainland France, we had activities in 3 main areas. Alsace is currently the more active. And we have also activities more specifically in overseas departments where heat is higher temperature is available, and in particular we have a power plant in Guadeloupe operating, where you have 15 megawatts electric pilot plants. Power plants. Okay, so that's basically the volcanic context, where we have a separate policy, because we have a policy for mainland France and we have policy for overseas department. So in terms of development, it's slightly different. Going back to heat, we have 2 main tools that are very important. One is a fund. Well, we call it a fund, but is money available for investment. And one is which is very important, is a tool to cover geological risk in the exploration phase, and it will be reinforced, extending to 2030, because this is very important and led to the improvement of the business in the past years. For the electricity, briefly, we had 2 setups, but unfortunately, this has been scrapped by the government. Administration tried to convey the feeling that it was important for improving the knowledge and advancing geothermal energy in France, but government thought otherwise. So for now, we don't have any policy in mainland France for electricity generation for geothermal energy. Very important is fund scheme for research and innovation. So we are working more and more closely to the EU for this topic. Of course, we have our own scheme from ADEME, the French agency for energy management and environment, and specific funds to improve the research innovation and drive down costs. And like I said, more importantly, we are closely working with our colleagues from Spain and from Germany and other countries and Netherlands, Iceland and everything at two levels. One is the implementation working groups we have, and we are working together with EJEC in that regard. But also we have a specific fund for research and innovation with our colleagues. This is on the right-hand side, called Iranet Geothermica, and Spain also is involved in this one.
Une minute, s'il vous plaît, Paul.
Yes, and that's the last one. Just a small mention of the ETH Innovation Fund. Previously, on the last period, there was 2 or 3 geothermal projects. And we hope to have also a geothermal project for the Innovation Fund, which is a very good tool for research and innovation and demonstration. Just the highlights. Well, I think we will receive, but a robust legal framework, investment and research and innovation to reduce costs, because we still need to have to achieve this, especially in electricity generation. Risk mitigation schemes, we try to convey the feeling and discuss with the European partner, and also a knowledge sharing and pooling, and that's achieved at EU level. I think it's pretty good. Thank you for your attention. Sorry.
Merci beaucoup, Paul. Donc, je vous propose de passer à la table ronde qui suit, et on relaiera les questions qui ont été envoyées par les participants plutôt après la table ronde dans la partie de discussion ouverte. Donc, moi, je suis Emmanuelle Robbins, je suis responsable des projets Europe et international au Pôle Avenia. Le Pôle Avenia rassemble environ 200 membres en lien avec les géosciences, et nous faisons en sorte de promouvoir les projets d'innovation, surtout s'ils sont collaboratifs. Nous sommes impliqués dans le projet Pixil dont nous parlons aujourd'hui, le projet Géoénergie Europe que Joseph a mentionné tout à l'heure, avec l'EGEC, la FPG et Géoplat, qui, donc, comme le disait Joseph, vise à l'internationalisation des compétences des PME européennes sur l'ensemble de la chaîne de valeur de la géothermie. Donc aujourd'hui, donc nous allons, j'ai le plaisir d'avoir avec nous comme participants pour cette table ronde, donc dans l'ordre alphabétique, je vais prendre. Donc, on a Philippe Dumas qui est intervenu tout à l'heure, qui est donc secrétaire général de l'EGEC, qui pourra nous partager sa vision européenne. Jean-Jacques Graff, qui est président de l'Association française des professionnels de la géothermie et qui a une large expérience industrielle justement de la géothermie en France. On a Virginie Ham, qui travaille à la direction des géoressources au BRGM, donc le Bureau de recherche géologique et minière en France, qui est hydrogéologue experte en géothermie profonde. Et on a Ignacy Ernst, j'espère que je me prononce correctement le nom, donc qui est à la tête du département de ressources géologiques du cluster de l'efficacité énergétique de Catalogne. Bonjour. Peut-être que Virginie, vous pouvez activer votre caméra aussi, comme ça on pourra voir tous l'ensemble des intervenants. Et donc, ce que je vous propose, en fait, c'est de chacun partager une expérience que vous pourriez avoir sur un exemple de projet à grande échelle et quels avaient été les problèmes qui ont été rencontrés. Pour faciliter, en fait, les changements d'interprète, ce que je vous propose, c'est que vous interveniez dans l'ordre suivant. Donc, d'abord Virginie, Philippe, Jean-Jacques et Ignacy. Et peut-être pour la deuxième question, donc, on fera l'inverse. Donc, restez en espagnol, donc Ignacy. Et puis, ensuite, que les participants en français puissent intervenir. Mais garder le même ordre. Donc, Virginie, Philippe et Jean-Jacques. Donc c'est ça. Je vais vous passer la parole, Virginie, si vous pouvez partager donc avec nous un exemple de projet large échelle et puis faire un retour d'expérience par rapport à ce projet, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Oui, bonjour, merci. En fait, je vais introduire cette table ronde en restant dans le contexte français. Déjà, la géothermie profonde en France, comme ça a été un peu abordé avant par Paul Bonnet-Blanc, cela représente environ 70 opérations géothermiques pour la production de chaleur qui sont actuellement en fonctionnement. Parmi ces 70 opérations, il y a environ 70% qui sont localisées dans le bassin parisien et dans la région Île-de-France et qui ciblent donc l'aquifère du Dogger, qui est exploité depuis les années 80 et qui a été pas mal relancé avec de nouvelles opérations depuis 2007. Et en termes de production, on va dire, énergétique géothermale, cela représente environ actuellement 2 TWh, dont 1,6 TWh dédiés au réseau de chaleur urbain. Donc, quels sont alors je ne vais pas forcément parler sur un projet spécifique, mais les enjeux plutôt globaux qu'on peut avoir au niveau français pour poursuivre le développement des projets et accélérer, j'ai envie de dire, les développements des projets de géothermie profonde, puisqu'on a un certain nombre d'objectifs en termes d'énergie renouvelable qui sont fixés notamment dans la programmation pluriannuelle de l'énergie et qui est d'atteindre, en gros, qui est de doubler finalement la production d'énergie géothermale, c'est-à-dire d'atteindre en gros un minimum de 4 TWh d'ici 2030. Donc déjà, il faut, par rapport à, on va dire, aux développements qui ont été faits jusqu'à présent, il faut pouvoir un peu étendre, on va dire, le développement de cette géothermie, puisque, comme on l'a vu dit auparavant, elle est assez centrée en Île-de-France, dans cette région. Donc, arriver à définir au niveau national des zones prioritaires de développement, à partir de la connaissance qu'on a actuelle du sous-sol, mais aussi par rapport aux zones ciblées, aux besoins de chaleur les plus importants. Ensuite, il faut aussi continuer, alors ça commence à être fait, mais ça vient doucement, c'est développer et accroître plus des phases d'exploration qui ont été faites beaucoup dans le domaine du pétrole, mais encore peu en géothermie. Donc, ça commence à être fait sur certains projets. Donc, notamment d'utiliser des méthodes, alors il y a différentes méthodes, mais qui peuvent apporter notamment des informations un peu plus précises sur les propriétés du sous-sol, comme la géophysique, surtout avec les nouveaux développements qui ont été faits, les nouvelles technologies permettent d'avoir des informations plus précises du sous-sol. Et afin notamment de définir des zones de mieux définir les zones de potentiel, on va dire, géothermique et d'accroître notamment on va dire, la probabilité de succès des projets. Aussi, ce qui se fait tout doucement, c'est d'utiliser aussi des technologies qui sont peut-être plus adaptées en termes d'architecture de puits et également de complétion, qui permettraient notamment d'accroître les débits et la puissance qu'on peut extraire d'un projet géothermique, et aussi d'avoir des architectures qui peuvent être plus adaptées au contexte local de la ressource. L'autre point aussi, qui est un point très important dans les projets de géothermie profonde, c'est la partie de développement et de tests qui sont faits en fin de forage, et notamment qui est vraiment une partie cruciale qui ne doit pas être négligée dans les projets, qui vont notamment apporter les informations sur le réservoir, mais surtout permettre de mieux développer des réservoirs qui sont peut-être initialement ont peut-être à la base pas forcément des caractéristiques qui sont tout de suite très bonnes. Donc c'est quand même un point important qui doit être bien prévu dès la base, dès le montage du projet. Alors tout ça pour arriver à développer ces projets, ça nécessite du temps, c'est coûteux, notamment si on veut faire de l'exploration plus en amont avant de se lancer vraiment dans un forage. Je pense que c'est vraiment le chemin pour arriver à développer, on va dire, de manière plus large en France, enfin, au niveau métropolitain, la géothermie profonde, et de manière à augmenter aussi les chances du succès de ces différents projets. Voilà, de manière plus générale, on pourra peut-être revenir après sur les...
Très bien, ben, merci beaucoup Virginie. Philippe, si vous pouvez nous donner, vous, votre vision au niveau européen.
Je vais laisser les porteurs de projets comme Jean-Jacques aller sur le détail des projets. Je vais enchaîner sur ce que Virginie a dit. Nous, on travaille plus sur des études socio-économiques et des revues de marché. Maybe I make it in English, maybe for a translator, sorry. just because Virginie started in French. We are more looking at socio-economic studies and looking at what is the market intelligence in Europe, what are the market evolution. When I was starting in geothermal in 2020 years ago, it was a report done by BRGM, ADME, and also some German partners, BTN, about de-risking project. In 2010, I did a project called GeoElec, looking at how we could develop geothermal electricity, and one key aspect was de-risking project. And now I'm running another project in 2010, so every 10 years we do that, about how we should mitigate the risk. In deep geothermal energy, we are a resource from the underground. It's not particular to geothermal energy, it's also oil and gas. We have to de-risk project. And it's what was introduced by Virginie. We know how to do it. So it's not a challenge for us. What we know is that you have a resource risk for the temperature and the flow rate. And it's the main risk associated with the development of deep geothermal energy, especially for heating and cooling, and especially a geothermal district heating developed by a municipality. We have all the tools available to de-risk this project, financial tools. In France, you have good practices with always the question, it's working in Paris, let's develop that in the rest of France, in Aquitaine, in Alsace, in the rest of France, where we have maybe lower temperature, but we can develop that. And same for Spain. In Spain, you can install and establish a risk insurance scheme. You're starting project with deep geothermal for greenhouses. It can develop anywhere. It's working. So we don't sometimes have to reinvent the wheel. We have a key challenge, de-risking project. We have already the instruments to overcome this risk.
Merci Philippe. Du coup, Jean-Jacques, vous allez sûrement compléter la partie côté industriel, en complétant ce que Virginie a mentionné tout à l'heure au niveau technique, et puis la partie juste mentionnée par Philippe. Excusez-moi, j'ai un peu de mal à passer de l'anglais au français.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Est-ce que vous me recevez bien?
Oui, parfait, merci.
Et vous voyez l'écran?
Oui, aussi.
Très bien, merci beaucoup pour cette invitation. Donc, j'en profite, je vais parler français, donc c'est assez rare dans les colloques. Donc, je vais faire ce petit exposé en français, mais j'ai mis les slides en anglais. Donc, de manière globale, je vais essayer de donner une vision industrielle de ce qui se passe aujourd'hui en France. Donc, vous voyez le premier bullet point, on voit le problème aujourd'hui, donc en France, comme dans beaucoup de pays, c'est que la géothermie profonde donc, représente à peu près 1% de la production de la chaleur renouvelable et elle représente 0,3% de la production globale de chaleur en France. Donc, je veux dire, c'est vraiment c'est remarquable. On voit effectivement, par rapport au potentiel que peut représenter la géothermie, on est vraiment très, 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 très loin de ce qu'on pourrait faire. Un autre point que j'aimerais souligner, on a 70 centrales chaleur qui sont en exploitation aujourd'hui à peu près en France, mais je dirais on peut constater que plus de 90% sont connectés à des réseaux de chaleur. Donc, c'est très bien. Donc, c'est important de verdir les réseaux. Mais par contre, ça ne concerne que les grandes villes. Donc, la France est un pays rural. Il y a bien sûr des pôles urbains où il faut poursuivre ça, mais il y a tout un territoire qui est oublié par la géothermie parce qu'il n'y a pas de réseau de chaleur. Donc ça, j'y reviendrai, je développerai un peu par la suite. On constate en France aussi un point fort, on a un très très bon niveau académique en géothermie, grâce au BRGM, les CNRS, les différentes écoles de géologie. Donc au niveau académique, il n'y a rien à dire. Par contre, au niveau industriel, donc là, l'expertise industrielle est vraiment très 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 faible en France. On peut lister entre 3 et 5 bureaux d'études un peu spécialisés, mais si vraiment on pousse et on gratte un peu dans tous les coins, on va trouver à peu près une cinquantaine de personnes qui sont dédiées à la géothermie profonde. Donc, c'est vraiment très faible. Donc, il y a toute une stratégie qui consiste à mettre en place une expertise industrielle. Donc, en France, on est reconnu pour notre expertise académique, mais pas d'expertise industrielle en géothermie. Et une des clés de succès pour moi, c'est justement réussir un transfert avec cette expertise qui existe aujourd'hui dans l'oil and gas. Et donc là, je pense notamment à toutes les entreprises qui sont autour du pôle Avenia. Et on a vraiment besoin de cette expertise, convaincre ces sociétés-là de venir travailler en géothermie. On a un besoin crucial d'expertise dans ce domaine-là. Et je terminerai, je fais un lien à ce que disait Philippe Dumas tout à l'heure. Il faut aussi qu'on développe l'acceptabilité sociétale. Donc, notamment, on l'a vu récemment sur Strasbourg, les risques sismiques dans des géologies plus compliquées que le Dogger du bassin parisien. Et là, il est important aussi qu'on fasse un vrai travail de maîtrise de risque et de communication. Voilà ce que je voulais dire pour cette première partie.
Très bien, merci Jean-Jacques. Je vais donner la parole à Ignacy maintenant pour la partie espagnole. Ignacy, vous avez le micro éteint.
Hi, can you hear me?
Merci.
Just a moment, I want to stop my translation. I don't know how to do it.
Vous pouvez parler en espagnol ou en anglais, comme vous voulez. La traduction se fera toute seule.
Si despliega la opción off.
Okay.
Gracias.
Okay, can you see now? Can you hear me now?
Sí, lo escuchamos.
Okay, and can you see the screen?
También perfecto.
Okay, thank you very much to invite me. It's I want to say that it's a great pleasure to attend this great and well-organized workshop. Congratulations for the success. Despite there would be no problem in expressing myself in English, I would prefer to speak in Spanish since today it's available this functionality. So voy a cambiar a hablar en español. También tengo que comentar que no soy director del Instituto Cartográfico y Geológico de Cataluña, soy jefe del área de de recursos geológicos. Bueno, en relación a la pregunta de si podemos compartir un proyecto a gran escala, yo lo que quería comentar es que en el caso de España, nuestro gran proyecto es precisamente encontrar la forma de hacer despegar la energía geotérmica en el mercado energético español, ¿no? Este es nuestro gran proyecto. Podría hacer énfasis pues, a algunos proyectos que desde el Instituto Cartográfico estamos participando, como GeoUrban, que se ha comentado, también otros 2 proyectos sobre geotermia superficial y geotermia profunda, pero yo creo que a nivel del marco español el gran proyecto que tenemos que hablar es cómo podemos hacer para que la geotermia despegue de una vez por todas, ¿no? Entonces entiendo que nosotros para conseguir esto necesitamos básicamente 3 aspectos. Primero de todo, pues una necesidad de reconocer que hay un recurso geotérmico disponible, básicamente con un mínimo de conocimiento geológico, geotérmico, a base de mapas y cuantificación de este recurso. Es importante que haya una percepción política de que existe este recurso y de que la tecnología existe y es útil y puede dar apoyo al proceso de descarbonización de la energía. Y luego el mercado obviamente tiene que estar preparado, ¿no? Realmente en Cataluña y en España en general entendemos que hay un gran potencial. Esto está asumido, yo creo, pero no se ha podido despegar hasta el día de hoy, ¿no? Tenemos diferentes grandes barreras, sobre todo la falta de exploración desde hace más de 50 años. La exploración profunda que tenemos en el territorio español y en Cataluña básicamente se ejecutó en los años 60 y 70 y la información actualmente disponible es muy escasa. Entiendo que esto es un problema que afecta a toda Europa, pero yo diría que en España sobre todo aún más. De hecho, nosotros tenemos como referente la situación en Francia, la situación en Alemania, ¿no? Que nos da mucha envidia. Creo que aún hay una falta de buena percepción de lo que es la energía geotérmica a nivel del Estado español. Creo que falta concienciación de que efectivamente tenemos un recurso que está disponible y que puede aprovecharse. Y otro aspecto es de que no hemos sido capaces, creo, de trasladar las buenas experiencias exitosas que se están produciendo en Europa a la opinión pública en España, que básicamente se centra en las renovables eléctricas hoy día. La fotovoltaica, la eólica, el discurso sobre todo va mucho por aquí y la geotermia es, bueno, la energía olvidada, ¿no? Y luego la parte de la legislación, tenemos una legislación muy antigua, yo creo que desfasada en los momentos actuales, una falta de regulación de las tarifas, falta de incentivos específicos para la geotermia profunda, yo diría, y obviamente no tenemos herramientas de esquemas de mitigación a riesgo como tienen Francia y otros países, como comentaba Philippe, ¿no? Yo creo que si conseguimos superar estos 3 aspectos, podremos entrar en el mercado. Hasta entonces no podremos entrar nunca en el mercado. Y el mercado necesita confianza, necesita, bueno, a base de la confianza puedes asumir un riesgo para promover exploraciones, para hacer evaluaciones del recurso, para promover nuevas inversiones, para hacer nuevos sondeos. Estos sondeos nos van a facilitar coger conocimiento, avanzar en la curva de aprendizaje, tendremos resultados, podremos promover plantas y todo ello pues lo podremos explicar, podremos difundir a la opinión pública y mejorar la percepción social y política de que este recurso es posible, existe, está ahí y ganaremos aceptabilidad en la sociedad y esto pues genera nuevos proyectos, nuevas oportunidades que a la vez generarán más recursos para hacer más exploraciones, más sondeos, más plantas, es decir, el mercado alimenta al mercado, pero si no entras en el mercado pues lo vas a tener difícil, ¿no? y esto, desde mi punto de vista, es la rueda motor de la energía geotérmica en Europa, ¿no? Países como Francia, Alemania, Holanda y otros países europeos, pues ya están aquí. Nosotros no estamos aquí, nosotros estamos fuera, ¿no? Creo que por parte de España tienen que hacerse varias acciones, como por ejemplo promover a nivel nacional un plan de investigación y recogida de nueva información, ponerse al día en la información antigua y recoger nuevos datos, lanzar proyectos demostrativos. Yo creo que esto es fundamental y creo que esto tiene que venir de la mano de los servicios geológicos, y lo digo en plural, porque en el Estado español pues como mínimo hay dos, ¿no? El INME y el Instituto Cartográfico y Geológico de Cataluña. Y luego preparar también un plan de comunicación y de difusión de la información a través de una plataforma web que facilite el acceso y la reutilización de estos datos por parte del sector privado, ¿no? Esto es fundamental. Y lo último, pues adaptar el mercado, implementar herramientas de mitigación del riesgo, como ha comentado Philip, que obviamente es cierto, no tenemos que inventar nada porque solo tenemos que copiar lo que ya está en Europa. Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much for your inputs. From what I'm hearing with this first tour of the table is that we have some competencies for exploration. Some competencies, technical competencies. Jean-Jacques mentioned that maybe we could use the oil and gas industry knowledge to maybe convert it and use it for geothermal industries. We have the financial aspects. We saw it in previous presentation that we have some inputs from the different governments. There is this aspect of the societal acceptance or awareness before that, and then acceptance. So what I'm hearing is that each of you mentioned maybe one or two blockage, and I'm wondering now what could be the little plus that could link all that together, and then that we could move forward. Because Ignacio just mentioned that geothermal energy is the forgotten energy. So how would you explain this? What is the blockage that on your side, which is the major blockage that geothermal energy is not as well known as the other green energies, so to say. So maybe Ignacio, if you could answer this question first.
Sí, claro, gracias. Bueno, como había comentado, desde mi punto de vista, pues hay tres aspectos clave. El primer, sobre todo en el Estado español y en Cataluña en particular, que es la zona que yo más conozco, donde actuamos, es importante avanzar en la investigación del terreno. En nuestro caso llevamos años sin hacer absolutamente nada en el subsuelo, y entonces esta es la primera parte. A partir de ello, la información, la demostración de que existe el recurso, yo entiendo que es la forma más fácil para poder demostrar a la opinión pública y a los tomadores de decisiones a nivel político de que pueden aprovechar este recurso y que puede favorecer al avance en la transición energética, ¿no? Y ello tiene que ser luego el catalizador de adaptar el mercado para que se adapten, para que consigamos las condiciones necesarias para que el sector privado aposte definitivamente para empezar a invertir. Sin este primer avance por parte de la administración pública, al menos en el Estado español, para hacer un paso de gigante, para apostar definitivamente en la geotermia profunda, difícilmente vamos a avanzar en el mercado. Más allá de todas las dificultades tecnológicas, técnicas de exploración, etcétera, etcétera, que se han comentado, ¿no? Pero al menos en nuestro contexto español, yo diría que lo primero es invertir definitivamente en exploración, demostrar que hay recursos, demostrar a la opinión pública y al público en general y al sector político de que se puede aprovechar. Esto es importantísimo.
Ok, merci. Virginie, peut-être que vous avez un commentaire à faire?
Alors, je vais en dire côté français, c'est vrai que, comme je le disais tout au début, on a beaucoup développé dans une région spécifique, hein, cette géothermie. Maintenant, c'est effectivement arrivé à l'étendre sur d'autres régions en France. Alors, pour cela, effectivement, il faut pouvoir... alors, on a un certain nombre de connaissances du sous-sol géologique, mais souvent, on a moins quand même d'informations, notamment sur les débits potentiels qu'on peut avoir de ces ressources, aussi sur les propriétés, voilà, sur la connectivité de ces réservoirs. Donc, il y a certaines techniques, je pense qu'il faut accroître la partie d'exploration dans différentes régions. La problématique, effectivement, peut-être ce qui fait que pour l'instant, ça ne s'est pas trop développé, c'est qu'on n'avait peut-être pas une couverture aussi du risque qui était bien, enfin, côté français, elle est quand même bonne, mais elle était surtout bien prise en compte pour la région Île-de-France, puisqu'il y avait un apport en plus des fonds de la garantie SAF et ADEME, un apport de la région qui était assez conséquent, qu'on n'avait pas dans les autres régions. Donc, c'est pour ça aussi qu'il y a toute cette, actuellement, cette refonte, on va dire, du fonds de garantie des opérations de géothermie qui est actuellement en cours de réflexion pour avoir finalement une couverture un peu plus homogène sur toutes les régions et puis aussi de pouvoir peut-être mieux couvrir, mieux prendre en charge les études en amont pour justement explorer des zones un peu plus où on a moins d'informations, moins de données qui proviennent essentiellement de l'exploration pétrolière qui a pu être faite. Donc, je pense qu'effectivement, c'est un point important de savoir qu'un opérateur quand il se lance, qu'il a quand même une couverture du risque liée au fait qu'on a une moins bonne connaissance de cette ressource et aussi que cette couverture puisse aussi mieux prendre la partie étude en amont qui serait nécessaire de réaliser pour réduire le risque.
Donc, comme Ignacy, en fait, vous dites que on pourrait faire du dérisking en ayant une meilleure connaissance des différents sous-sols dans plus de régions que ce que l'on connaît actuellement.
Voilà, en fait. Actuellement, c'est vrai que c'est assez limité.
Et donc, il y a la partie financière, effectivement, pour promouvoir les différents projets. Donc, ça peut être exploratoire. Moi, j'ai entendu dire aussi que maintenant, les financements pardon, vont surtout sur des projets qui sont relativement aboutis avec des TRL qui sont assez avancés. Donc, je ne sais pas si c'est incitatif pour pouvoir faire en sorte que les projets aboutissent, qu'on ne reste pas au niveau exploratoire. Mais j'ai aussi peut-être que Jean-Jacques Graff, vous pouvez commenter sur ce que je viens de dire et je rebondirai sur la partie sociétale après.
Oui, merci. Donc, je voulais juste faire aussi un focus là sur les objectifs. Donc, l'objectif de 4 TWh est un objectif minimal, mais la loi de programmation de l'énergie nous propose aussi d'aller jusqu'à 5,2 TWh en 2028. Et donc, il faut avoir en tête que ça fait presque du x3 par rapport à aujourd'hui. Hein. Donc, et pour ça, effectivement, je rejoins ce qu'a dit l'interlocutrice précédente, qu'il faut développer l'outil actuel de garantie du risque en dehors du bassin parisien, bien sûr. Hein, donc, parce que n'importe quel investisseur, qu'il soit une collectivité pour un réseau de chaleur ou un industriel pour une application industrielle, la garantie du risque était vraiment fondamentale. Hein. Donc, l'eau chaude n'a pas le prix du pétrole ou du gaz et elle ne se transporte pas. Donc, elle est à consommer sur place. Donc, le projet, c'est one shot. Hein. Donc, si vous n'avez pas de ressources, ben, tout votre investissement de forage, vous ne pouvez pas le rattraper comme en pétrole ou en gaz avec une campagne de plusieurs forages. Hein. Donc, ce n'est pas la même logique. Donc, c'est important d'étendre ce fonds de garantie qui a vraiment très bien marché pendant 30 ans et l'étendre en dehors du bassin parisien, et notamment dans les zones où il y a les gros potentiels, qui sont très souvent les zones avec un sous-sol fracturé. Autre point aussi, je pense qu'il est vraiment important de développer la valorisation industrielle de la chaleur. Donc, il y a un petit projet, enfin petit, c'est un gros projet de production de 25 MW thermiques en Alsace, un projet qui alimente une industrie pour faire de la vapeur, de l'eau chaude, de l'air chaud. Et pour moi, c'est vraiment le modèle de ce que devrait surtout être la géothermie dans les années à venir. Et pour ça, effectivement, valoriser de manière industrielle la chaleur, ça va créer des emplois. Et à ce moment-là, la géothermie sera peut-être un peu plus écoutée, un peu plus regardée, parce qu'elle sera génératrice d'emplois. On peut faire beaucoup de choses avec la géothermie. Hein. On peut faire de la production maraîchère, horticole, on peut faire des procédés de séchage. Il y a énormément de choses à faire. Et on n'a malheureusement pas encore eu ce réflexe avec les régions, avec l'État, avec l'ADEME ou des entités de ce style-là, de réfléchir à la création d'emplois. Et pour moi, c'est une des clés aussi en termes de crédibilité de la géothermie. Un réseau de chaleur, c'est très bien, il faut le faire, mais c'est très discret, personne n'en parle. Très souvent, la plupart des gens qui sont alimentés en chaleur géothermale ne le savent même pas. Donc, il faut faire parler de la géothermie, et pour ça, la création d'emplois, pour moi, est un vecteur important. Et en parallèle, vous le savez sans doute, et Philippe en a parlé, il y a beaucoup de lithium aussi dans les eaux profondes. Donc, et l'enjeu de lithium est fondamental. Donc, dans la gigafactory européenne qui se profile, les besoins sont de l'ordre de 59 000 tonnes par an de lithium, de carbonate de lithium. Aujourd'hui, les ressources sécurisées sont de l'ordre de 11 000 tonnes de carbonate de lithium. Donc, vous voyez le gap qu'il y a encore. Et donc, la géothermie peut être vraiment un acteur clé de la production de lithium. Et donc là, il y aura encore un intérêt supplémentaire pour d'autres industriels. Donc, on aura peut-être d'autres industriels miniers qui seront intéressés par le développement de cette technologie. Et bien sûr, comme je le disais avant, donc les zones les plus intéressantes en termes de potentiel sont les zones faillées, puisque les réservoirs ne sont pas horizontaux, ils sont verticaux. Donc, avec la convection, ça fait des températures relativement élevées, à des profondeurs pas trop importantes. Par contre, dans ces zones faillées, il y a le risque de sismicité. Donc là, je pense que toute la communauté, que ce soit en France, en Europe et même internationale, il faut vraiment aussi faire un gros travail. Et notamment, je pense à la filière oil and gas qui a une expérience là-dedans, dans la facturation. Donc, c'est bien de ça dont il s'agit. Hein. Donc, c'est avoir le retour d'expérience de ces entreprises-là pour qu'il y ait une maîtrise totale de cette thématique sismique. Et enfin, donc, il faut aussi développer l'acceptabilité. Et pour ça, il faut beaucoup mieux communiquer. La géothermie est une énergie discrète. Donc, les centrales qui fonctionnent, on les voit quasiment pas. Elles sont dans des bâtiments, donc surtout pour la chaleur. Donc, il faut qu'on communique beaucoup plus en géothermie. Alors, ça peut se faire de plusieurs manières, en utilisant des outils comme YouTube, en faisant des bandes dessinées éventuellement pour avoir un accès aux jeunes. Il faut vraiment qu'on fasse parler beaucoup plus de la géothermie. Voilà mon avis pour développer un peu la situation actuelle de la géothermie profonde.
Alors, on parle de bande dessinée, donc on va parler de Obélix. Lui, il est tombé tout petit dans la potion magique. Moi, ça fait très peu de temps que je suis que je fréquente la géothermie. Et effectivement, je vous confirme que vous tous, vous êtes dans ce monde de la géothermie et puis vous connaissez bien les attentes, les tenants, les aboutissants. Mais pour les gens qui sont déjà impliqués depuis longtemps, il y a tout l'aspect de-risking dont parlait Philippe. Après, si vraiment on va plus loin, il y a toute la partie connaissance du sous-sol, effectivement. Mais c'est vrai que pour Ignacy l'a mentionné aussi, il y a vraiment cette notion de awareness. Je pense que le grand public ne connaît pas la géothermie. Donc moi, encore une fois, il y a 2 ans de ça, je ne connaissais pas du tout la géothermie. Pour moi, il y avait quelque chose qui se passait en Islande et c'est tout. Je n'avais même pas du tout conscience que la géothermie pouvait exister en France ou en Espagne. Encore moins la géothermie qui pourrait fabriquer de l'électricité. Alors ça, j'étais extrêmement surprise. Et donc, je pense que dans la partie acceptabilité, il y a toute la partie éducation de la population au sens large, justement par le biais d'exemples de success story comme une entreprise qui crée des emplois, qui permet de développer une région par rapport à un projet bien spécifique et communiquer, rebondir dessus pour une éducation au sens large. Donc, je ne sais pas si c'est ce qui manque ou si c'est plus de mesures incitatives, mais les mesures incitatives financières, à mon avis, viendront si justement la population réclame la géothermie. Donc, c'était un peu le but de ma question tout à l'heure. J'ai l'impression qu'il y a des éléments qui sont un peu autour de la table et qu'est-ce qu'on va trouver pour pouvoir permettre de mettre tout ce monde en marche de façon large et visible du grand public. Donc, chacun a répondu par rapport à ces... Enfin, je ne sais pas, Philippe, si vous voulez compléter sur la partie acceptation sociétale, c'est de ne pas réinventer.
I think you opened the debate. What we can say is that it was clear in the graph from Paul Bonnet-Blanc. Indeed, in France, we have seen a better development in Spain, but it's still a niche market. We need to go beyond. I show you, we can cover 25% of the heating and cooling demand. But what is the key? It's not de-risking project. It's not bringing social acceptance. It's to stop this unfair competition with fossil fuel. In France, in Spain, you don't have any carbon pricing of your gas boiler. You still give subsidies to gas boiler. By chance, in France, they announced now that in new buildings, you will not be allowed anymore, and it's a ban of gas boilers. But it's just the start. We still have a lot of gas boilers installed in France, in Spain, in buildings, receiving money. So we have already the technology existing. We have the tool existing. We need to move from a niche market to a mass market. It's not with de-risking instrument. It's to stop these unfair market conditions. So it's clear. If we want to create jobs, if we want to have social acceptance, we need to have more projects. But the project in many areas is that we are in competition with unfair subsidized fossil fuel assets. And that we cannot compete. In industry, as mentioned by Jean-Jacques, we have already many examples. And why it's existing and developed in other areas like Netherlands or Sweden is because they have improved the market conditions. And here, it's a big game changer.
Donc, on parle plus de mesures incitatives pour forcer la géothermie dans le pack énergétique des habitants.
It's always the issue. If we are not here to ask money, subsidies for heating and cooling, we need de-risking instruments. We need maybe some flanking measures, some resource exploration campaign, but we need fair competition. And with a fair competition with gas, oil, and coal in Central and Eastern Europe, we will be able to develop, not only us, over renewable heating and cooling sources, biomass, solar thermal. We are open-minded. But geothermal, we can cover 25% of the demand.
Très bien. Et merci pour toutes vos contributions, chacun de vous. On peut peut-être passer maintenant à une session de questions que l'on a reçues des participants. Alors, je vois qu'on a une question pour Monsieur Graff. Pourriez-vous élaborer sur l'aspect one-shot, s'il vous plaît?
Oui, ce que je voulais dire, c'est que quand on fait une campagne d'exploration pétrolière, on fait des campagnes de plusieurs puits, voire plusieurs dizaines de puits. Et donc, en gros, si vous avez 9 puits qui sont secs et un puits qui produit beaucoup, vous avez remboursé très rapidement tout le reste des puits qui ont été faits, qui n'ont pas été un succès. En géothermie, vous n'avez pas cette possibilité. Donc, si vous investissez un puits à 2000 mètres, plusieurs millions, si vous n'avez pas la ressource, c'est fini, quoi. Vous ne pouvez plus, vous n'allez pas prendre le risque de forer un deuxième puits, voire un troisième pour trouver la ressource, hein. Donc très souvent, les puits sont faits à proximité de l'endroit où va être installée la centrale et la valorisation. Donc c'est tout un autre modèle, hein, c'est un autre paradigme. Donc effectivement, c'est important d'avoir en tête que c'est du one-shot presque, hein. Donc, avec la garantie du risque, on peut éventuellement tenter d'améliorer la productivité du puits s'il n'est pas tout à fait à l'objectif, et éventuellement aussi mettre et à ce compte-là, sécuriser également le deuxième puits, le deuxième forage. Donc, mais c'est très, très limité, hein. Si vous ratez le premier puits, s'il est complètement sec, le projet est fini. Donc ça, c'est bien un aspect qu'il faut avoir en tête, c'est la grande différence, hein. Donc c'est pour ça que je parlais du one-shot.
Bien, merci. J'ai vu qu'il y a d'autres questions qui sont passées dans la partie questions-réponses et qui ont été partiellement répondues en tout cas. Donc je vous propose de passer à la session d'après, qui est la partie open discussion. Juste avant, si tout le monde a sa caméra allumée, donc on va prendre une photo si ça ne vous dérange pas pour la communication par rapport à l'événement. Et ensuite, je vais repasser la main à Joseph pour la partie d'open discussion. Donc, Paul, vous êtes là.
Okay, so hello. Thank you very, very much, Emmanuel, for hosting this extremely interesting roundtable. I think we were very lucky to have you managing this, and also I have to thank all the panelists which have intervened here. I mean, they provided very clear answers. I mean, they have kept, let's say, to the time constraints that we had, which were huge. So a big thanks to all the panelists today, not only on the roundtable. I think we have seen a lot of very interesting aspects, let's say, relevant, let's say, for the geothermal, let's say, or development, let's say, in the following years. We have first heard about, let's say, technological aspects, or how, let's say, we can improve, let's say, the technology which is, let's say, related to geothermal energy. We have had this, let's say, optimistic look at the European level. We have also had the national take, let's say, very specific, what's happening in France, in Spain. And yeah, we've been discussing the several issues which might be hampering, let's say, the deployment of geothermal. I think we had a very successful, let's say, discussion today. So now we enter the next phase of today's event. So first, what I would like to do is, if you have the moment, all the panelists which are here present, we would like you to show your faces. Just turn your camera on for a moment. We would like to take a group picture so that everybody is present. So if you can, please, for a second, just show yourselves. I mean, it would be great for us, let's say, for communication purposes after this event. So in the meantime, while you set up let's say the cameras and everything, I mean, I would just like to comment how it's going to work, this open discussion. So I will be using for the moment, let's say English, but the session is meant to be multilingual as well. So the idea here is that you can raise your hand. You should have a button, let's say, below your Zoom screen where you can raise your hand. If you want to ask a question, we will keep track of people which have raised hands. And then we will give you, let's say, the chance to phrase your questions, which might be, let's say, directly addressed to one of our panelists, or can be general questions open for discussion and hoping to steer, let's say, a healthy discussion today. So first, I would like to ask Rose, are we okay for that picture? I mean, is everything fine? Are we missing somebody? No answer, not sure. Okay, hopefully people will show up and we will get that. So, all right, so bear in mind, you can raise your hand any moment. I mean, what we could do for the moment in order to steer a little bit discussion, I have a couple of questions here. There was an answer question which showed up in at the very early talks. I will just launch that, and I hope that some of the panelists today can answer it. The question was, what are the main roles for geoscientists in the development of the geothermal energy in Europe? I mean, what is, yeah, that actually we have not the, let's say, the name of the let's say, the person who asked the question, but anybody feels capable of answering this? I think the question came up at Philippe's talk. I don't know if we have Philippe around.
Yeah, what I was replying shortly is that indeed,
yeah,
geoscience for me, and maybe we could hear from other ones, is first to enable the project development and to support the project developers in first assessing and accessing the resource. But secondly, what is often forgotten is that it's also to ensure a sustainable production. And it's here where too much we have a disconnection between subsurface and surface, but no, it's the same project. So here geoscience is to really help, which is the end goal, is the generation of heating and cooling to support the project development, for me.
I agree with you. I don't know if anybody wants to add on what Philippe just mentioned. We have also, other issues that we can discuss. I mean, like, for example, we have here a few questions showing up. I mean, keep in mind, you can speak up if you want. You can just raise your hand and we will open the mic, but still we have some written questions here. For example, one of them is that nowadays data analysis and machine learning are key technologies to improve comprehensive subsurface models, surface planning, and etc. What are the needs of data usage for geothermal exploration and production in Europe and other regions? So that's, I guess, a very technological question. I don't know who is, who feels like he can give an answer to this. Anybody? Do you feel like data is a big constraint, like in terms of its size or its availability? Is that an open concern, let's say, in the community at the moment? I'm going to need to point fingers. I will ask the question directly to Ignacio.
Josep.
Yep.
No, ¿me oís bien? Sí. No, Josep, yo quería hacer referencia al aspecto anterior de los geocientíficos. Yo creo que un aspecto muy importante es que la academia, las universidades, también se suban al motor de las renovables. Y las universidades de geología también, las universidades de ingenierías de minas, de ingenierías geológicas, geólogos en general. Yo creo que hay que hacer una actualización de los planes de formación en las escuelas, sobre todo para integrar la geotermia. Y obviamente sí, su papel es fundamental para el desarrollo y el despegue de la geotermia. En las primeras fases, obviamente, en la fase explorativa y en la fase de modelización. Creo que son indispensables, igual que en otras fases de los proyectos, otros profesionales como industriales, etcétera, pues tienen su rol, ¿no?
No puedo estar más de acuerdo. Desde el punto de vista académico, yo también me veo muy identificado en la falta, dijéramos, quizá de especialistas, ¿no? De educación dedicada, ¿no? a este sector. Y es uno de los problemas que nos atañe. Okay, so switching back to English. I don't know if we have any raised hands, Emilia? Somebody?
Yes, Virginia need to say something, and then Ernst. And after them, Paul. That is the order. Virginia.
Oui, enfin, je m'exprime en tant effectivement que Bergem, dont le rôle effectivement de développer la connaissance du sous-sol, notamment au niveau national évidemment côté français, mais aussi potentiellement dans d'autres régions. Après, peut-être le frein actuel à la connaissance, effectivement, on a un certain nombre de connaissances géologiques dans la plupart des bassins sédimentaires. Maintenant, il faut pouvoir aller un peu plus loin, notamment pour avoir un peu plus d'informations sur les paramètres qui vont influer notamment le fait qu'un projet géothermique va être un succès ou pas, qui sont plus les propriétés du sous-sol, comme la porosité, la perméabilité et la connectivité de ces réservoirs. Et ça, comme je disais dans la table ronde, ça nécessite effectivement de faire des explorations un peu plus poussées que juste exploiter les données qui ont pu être acquises, notamment lors des campagnes qui ont pu être faites pour l'exploitation du pétrole, et notamment avec des techniques plus récentes. Mais par contre, pour faire cela, comme on disait auparavant, ça a quand même un coût. Donc, il faut aussi pouvoir développer ces fonds, enfin mettre à disposition ces fonds pour que le Bergem ou d'autres instituts puissent effectivement mieux travailler dans cette exploration de nouveaux réservoirs géothermiques. Voilà, je voulais ajouter ça.
Merci, Ignasi. ¿Tú querías aportar? Vimos tu mano. Okay, Paul.
Well, the issue I wanted to raise is also a little bit. It's the data availability and privacy. We have a very different situation between oil and gas, with probably massive data acquisition compared to geothermal, which is really costly for the project as a whole, because after all we are harnessing only hot water and not oil or gas. So that's critical. In France we are working on it, at least even at a basic, even before the data processing step. I think we really need to find a way to mutualize the data sets, and like Virginie said about before, what can BRGM, I mean the French Geological Survey, can do, and other institutions. We need to probably enhance the data set repository and try to streamline everything. But this is easy to say, but not easy to achieve, because they are proprietary at stake, and other consideration, which is a bit difficult. You have, I have in mind, I mean, what they are doing in the US, where all the Netherlands closer to our border. But let's say, I think we might have, again, my presentation was talking about massification, but like Isaac said, we can supply heat and cooling. So really, maybe at a larger scale, that's something we have to look carefully in data and the data usage.
Thank you very much. We have a question from the attendees. Jean-Claude. We can hear you now, Jean-Claude.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Emilia. Yeah, I just wanted to comment. So I'm Jean-Claude Kuesch from the company Real Time Seismic. I would like to ask Joseph, is it possible to show us to show the people the slides on the Frugal acquisition, the one that you showed initially?
Let me recall.
Because it's an illustration of what we've just discussed and what Paul mentioned. So in terms of seismic exploration, what we recently did in the north of Belgium with GTG, an acquisition company based in the southwest of France, is what we call the Frugal acquisition, which consists in fact in trying to optimize the number of sources and receivers to be deployed for an acquisition. You see in the middle, you have the map of the acquisition. So the source positions are in red, and the blue positions are the geophones. So basically, it's 2,000 receivers and 1,000 shot points. So it's a quite small seismic acquisition. What we use in terms of technology is these small nodes that you see here at the bottom, this orange carrot. We don't see it very much, but close to the blue box there is so it's a new generation of seismic sensor. And basically within a few days of acquisition, we managed to acquire a data set, which in the end, by some tricks of processing, allowed to build an entire 3D cube. And in this particular region, the quality of the seismic is outstanding. So initially, we did not think to have such a result. We were not super confident in our capability to rebuild a 3D volume of seismic, just with this skeleton of seismic acquisition, but it worked, and it worked extraordinarily well. And that's very promising for geothermal industry, because it allows to lower down the costs of the acquisition and of the processing significantly. So that's what I wanted to add to this debate on the lack of data and the lack of data in many regions of interest. So needless to say that this has been acquired in an urban area, so this is not so invasive in terms of acquisition, because it's only a few days of acquisition and a limited number of equipment deployed in the field. So that's the end of my intervention.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude. And indeed, it is, let's say, showing steps forward towards, let's say, acquiring more data, better data, cheaper data. Let's say, again, the scale, the economical scale of geothermal is not the one of, let's say, of the oil and gas industry, for example. So, let's say, concepts such as the one that you shared, I think, are very important for.
So maybe I can add a last word, because we talked about de-risking the prospects. So to us, our vision in real-time seismic is that it's a craziness to go for a deep geothermal project without acquiring 3D data, and somehow without going with a pre-drilling geomechanical 3D survey. And that also answers some question that has been raised in the.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think also, I mean, it has been briefly discussed before, but those events that, I mean, let's say the seismic, let's say the fluid-induced seismicity that we have seen, like in Bexhill a couple of years ago, we've seen more recently in the north of France. is not helping. And I think that the public, let's say, what they get to read is geothermal provoked earthquakes, and let's say that the answer has been no more geothermal. And that's kind of the end of the story for them. And I think we are lacking, I don't know, a scientific answer to that. I mean, like telling people what is actually going on, what really the problem might be. That there's a lot of information which is not being conveyed to the public opinion, and I think it's really hurting the geothermal industry. I don't know what your takes are on this, but it might be really an issue.
Yes, it is. And do you still hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. No, I think that's the technology is here to de-risk and maybe to at least to reduce the risk of seismicity, induced seismicity. It's always a question of costs. But what we are working at the moment, in real-time seismic at least, we are working at trying to provide the technology, 3D seismic, 3D velocity models at a lower price, in order to encourage and to enable these all these de-risking studies to happen.
Yeah, thanks, Jean-Claude. Philippe, I think, has a raised hand. I mean, if you may add something.
Yeah, maybe not to confuse, but one incident, the risk, and the potential impact. It's why we have created also a hashtag this week good news. Every week we have more good news than bad news to report on geothermal energy. I encourage you to go to Twitter to report also your news to us. We have thousands of good news to report. Of course, incident is part of a technical development. We have to take them seriously into account, but I think we have much more good news to report than bad news.
Again, the optimist side, I love that part. So thank you, Philippe. So James has also something to add?
Yeah, on the, I guess, induced seismicity point, there is also projects going on at the moment looking at early warning signs to counteract any potential induced seismicity. So mitigating against those potential negative effects is also happening. So as Philippe said, there's a lot of good news out there. So these projects need to be highlighted as well, kind of in alignment with geothermal projects. One of them is Co-Seismic, which was a geothermal project funded in the first round of that as well. So if anyone's interested, I recommend they go check that out.
Okay, thank you, James, very much. All right, so that is one of the, let's say, of the long-standing issues, let's say, in geothermal, and hopefully we will be able to provide with more solutions. Just some more items which might help the discussion. I'm going to just talk about a concept which we haven't discussed today here. I hear a lot about the word storage capacity for, let's say, for complementing the renewable mix. Okay, that's a big thing. Okay? There's a lot of investments and R&D and such for that. Storage being something which is used to complement wind and solar, because wind and solar go up and down, and then you need something which gives you, let's say, baseline support, let's say, to your energy mix. Isn't this something which is in direct competition to geothermal? Is this something which is more or less stepping on the same, I would say, portfolio as geothermal, particularly deep geothermal and electricity generation from geothermal energy? So I don't know if anyone is willing to give their impressions on this. Maybe Jean-Jacques, for example. I mean, you might have a broad vision, let's say, on the status of geothermal. So do you see this as a competitor, let's say? I'm not sure he's...
Meantime, you speak about underground thermal energy storage?
No, in general, storage can be in batteries, can be potential storage, can be in many ways.
Because as geothermal, we provide underground thermal energy storage, which makes us even more competitive and more interesting for this sector integration. And just for information, we were mainly looking at low temperature storage, there's a big call in the next Horizon Europe work program on high temperature thermal energy storage underground. So it's an ongoing topic for sure.
Okay, very interesting. All right, yeah.
Perdón, no, complementaría lo que ha comentado Philippe. Efectivamente, el almacenamiento subterráneo de energía térmica es, y entiendo, una tecnología que se complementa perfectamente y de hecho mejora la competitividad de la geotermia de muy baja temperatura y por tanto son tecnologías que seguramente van a ir a la par, ¿no? Porque están altamente relacionadas, pero también el almacenamiento. Has comentado almacenamiento en baterías. Almacenamiento en baterías es una tecnología que ayuda también al sector de la bomba de calor geotérmica en su funcionamiento y en hacerla más competitiva. Por tanto, claramente beneficiosas.
Gracias, thank you. I think Jean-Jacques has raised his hand. I mean, please, you may unmute your phone and answer.
Oui, simplement, c'est juste pour rappeler que la géothermie profonde peut aussi participer au stockage de l'électricité, donc grâce à l'extraction de lithium. Donc là, c'est un pan vraiment énorme de développement possible pour la géothermie profonde, donc, principalement dans les milieux fracturés, donc c'est là où se trouve cette ressource. Et on a aussi beaucoup d'autres éléments dans certaines eaux géothermales, hein, donc il y a d'autres métaux rares. Donc je pense que l'avenir aussi on fera partie de l'avenir de la géothermie aussi, des modes d'extraction de différents éléments qui se trouvent dans l'eau géothermale. Donc on peut être aussi tout à fait s'associer dans le stockage de l'électricité.
Josep?
Yes,
Josep?
please.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I would like to add something as well, because it happens that in our portfolio of clients, we have a geothermal industry, but we have also gas storage and a CO2 storage companies. So for us, in terms of geophysics, the service and the demand or the requirements are pretty much the same when it comes to induced seismicity, the monitoring of gas storage reservoirs is something which is very instructive, I would say, because it's something that has been ongoing in that business for a long time. So geothermal industry benefits of this experience and expertise. And okay, for me, CO2 storage and geothermal industry, they are linked together, and we see the same problematics coming up for both, and with the same budget constraints as well.
I agree with you. Yeah,
and maybe
I think
just
that,
to not forget, because it's something also ongoing in many areas, the storage and the link electricity heating will happen with district heating and large heat pumps. We'll make all the connection between the two sectors, the flexibility. So in geothermal, we have a lot of, it was one of my graphs in this sector integration where we want to make the transition. Geothermal, we have a lot of key aspects. Underground storage, batteries, but also flexibility of the power plants and large heat pumps, which can be also ramped up and down for district heating.
Yeah, you're very right. Then other aspects which I think are relevant and maybe they have not been exploited, let's say, in depth in today's event. I think that the management of subsurface resources overall, let's say, is something which still has quite a national content to it, right? I mean, it's nothing which is easily shared, let's say, I'm meaning in the European Union, right? I mean, like in many other aspects, let's say there's a lot of openness, let's say, in sharing information and such. I have the feeling that for those, let's say, aspects which are fundamental, let's say, for the development of technologies or let's say, or the scope of businesses, let's say, related to geothermal, we might have barriers, let's say, which are, let's say, at the national level. Again, I'm trying to, let's say, to keep information, I mean, or of your own, let's say, subsurface resources beyond, let's say, the heterogeneity, let's say, in the coverage or the resolution that we have in some countries compared to others. So do you think that there's some action needed there as well? I mean, like in trying to raise and lower the barriers, let's say, and let's say allowing for a much more open, let's say, access to all kinds of information about the subsurface, so that people can use that and build upon that knowledge. Anybody that might have an opinion on that? Perhaps Paul can give us his view. Yeah, you may just unmute your mic.
Yeah, well, a little bit like I said, but to maybe go a little further, is that well, subsurface, we were more in a previous era, we were more on a private initiatives situation, and now we have subsidies going for exploration, for geothermal energy, or CO2 storage in some area, or anything we do with underground, and that's of course the time we change our perspective, even in the government administration sphere, but also in the industry. Well, it will take time, but obviously we need to. That's more now than ever a public concern and a public right and public let's say a good to share among us. So I think in principle there is no problems, but now we have to we had a legislation to, let's say, it was the contrary prior in the past centuries, to prevent people for stealing data and information for people who were spending money to harness natural resources. Now in our context of carbon neutrality and efforts, we need to drive at a much higher level for the benefit of all. Of course, this is now more a common good, but with a century or more of legislation and I don't know the terms of English, jurisprudence. It's a bit difficult, you know, to change the azimuth and go someplace else. But that's probably an obvious target, which will take time, but will benefit from the underground industry. And I think that's a major challenge because there was this long history. The basis of our prosperity, because when you think about it, without oil, coal first, but more preciously oil and gas, that has driven the societies, Western societies, for at really a much higher level, and that's the key fact of the past century. So this is really what I want to say, is that it's this is really right now, unfortunately, I would say the backbone of our society, and we need to change that. And the underground, even if people, when they fill their tank in at the petrol station for their car, they don't think about it. But people around the table, probably most from this as a geoscientist background, they know it's all coming from ground, and that all the industry was organized around this, you know, and so let's say I think the target is clear, but we have to go to that and to share data, but it's not easy, because really, again, it's deep into our society and how we organize, and how the money was flowing into this. So this is really a big challenge we have to address.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's really important. I think we can also convey the question to your Spanish, let's say, counterpart in this case, from Midae. Luis, no sé si me estás escuchando ahora mismo. Sí, Luis, ¿me puedes oír?
Sí, sí,
Sí.
os estoy escuchando.
Estamos hablando de la necesidad de potencial de abrir un poco más las barreras, dijéramos, para el acceso a la información de lo que hay en el subsuelo, dijéramos, como una manera de favorecer que nuevas tecnologías puedan ser empleadas para explorar el subsuelo, para mejorar nuestra capacidad de conocer lo que pasa y además no solo internamente, nacionalmente, sino también transnacionalmente a nivel europeo, si deberíamos hacer un esfuerzo mayor en abrir las barreras de acceso al dato. Me gustaría saber su opinión al respecto.
Creo que sí, creo que se debería hacer un esfuerzo en esa dirección y no solo de abrir barreras para acceso al dato, sino también de hacer más exploraciones para tener más datos, ¿no? Creo que son dos lagunas que están frenando el desarrollo de la energía geotérmica.
Muchas gracias. So switching back to English, I think that one of the biggest, let's say, hopes that I have in this whole story. I mean, I'm going to be also optimistic now, and I mentioned that briefly at the beginning of my presentation. I do think that although, let's say, the resources, like was mentioned before by Paul, for example, I mean, we all acknowledge that petrol comes, let's say, from the subsurface, and it's, let's say, we have been, let's say, taking, let's say, rich resources from the subsurface. Europe has never been extremely rich in those resources. I mean, we don't possess, let's say, huge, oil reservoirs or gas reservoirs, but we might be probably the leading, let's say, region in technology for exploring for that and for exploiting that, let's say, those resources. So now it's a moment, let's say, of introspection, let's say, of switching back, let's say, those the huge know-how that we have already, let's say, in place. I mean, we have great know-how in drilling, in exploring, in analyzing data, risk analysis, all of that, let's say, just coming a little bit, looking at inwards, let's say, and having a local perspective and trying to apply and optimize the processes needed to, let's say, to exploit geothermal energy. I think we have, let's say, all tools at hand. I mean, there's no fundamental problem, let's say, with improving geothermal. So I'm going to also think that the next decade should be really positive for the sector, and hopefully that will be the case. So I would like to know whether there's any other attendee here. I have Jean-Claude still with a raised hand. I don't know whether this is the next question or you just kept your hand up.
No, it was I was raising the hand before, but sorry, I don't have anything else to add.
No problem.
At the moment, let's say.
Okay. So anybody has any questions, any issues, anything that they would like to share? Anything at all?
Hay una pregunta de question and answer del público que es para Ignacy Erms. ¿Cómo debería ser la legislación para permitir el desarrollo del aprovechamiento de los recursos geotérmicos?
Bueno, esta es la pregunta clave y difícil de responder, pero en el caso de España yo lo que diría es que se debería actualizar la ley de minas. Es una ley que es preconstitucional en realidad, tiene ya muchos años y creo que esta ley, la que ampara, diríamos, la explotación del recurso geotérmico, debería modernizarse para adaptarse a las nuevas realidades de las tecnologías actualmente existentes. Este creo que debería ser el principal paso. Más allá de comentar esto, pues es difícil decir que debería contener una nueva ley de minas o incluso si debería haber propiamente una ley de recursos naturales que enmarcara pues, la explotación de este recurso, ¿no? Pero claramente la normativa legal vigente, al menos en el Estado español, dificulta el desarrollo, ralentiza el desarrollo de la implementación de proyectos, alarga los procesos administrativos, lo hace casi inviable, ¿no? Y con lo cual muchos inversores pues se echan atrás. Esto hay que cambiarlo.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. So, if there is no other questions, last minute, anything at all?
Sí, perdón, Josep, quería
Sí.
puntualizar un aspecto que me he olvidado, que un compañero me ha recordado ahora mismo. También las leyes de impacto ambiental, ¿no? Esto es también, bueno, como todo proyecto de gran envergadura, pues tiene que pasar el trámite ambiental, pero este también es un trámite que alentiza y dificulta la tramitación del proyecto. Entonces, se debería pues articular la fórmula para que estos procesos administrativos para tirar adelante los proyectos sean más ágiles. Y esto es parte de la administración. La administración tiene que hacer lo necesario para que los proyectos sean rápidos y seguros, pero rápidos en los procesos de tramitación.
Totalmente de acuerdo. Muchas gracias, Ignacio. So we have two raised hands. So Virginie, I think, was the first. You may unmute yourself.
Oui, je suis assez d'accord sur ce qui a été dit juste précédemment. Je pense qu'on a tous les technologies, les outils pour faire l'exploration, mais l'exploration plus dédiée, on va dire, géothermie, et que peut-être aujourd'hui, ce qui est plus bloquant, ce sont les aspects, je dirais, plus financiers, mais aussi potentiellement plus administratifs, juridiques, qui font que c'est pas le contexte actuel ne favorise pas forcément le déploiement de la géothermie profonde.
Yeah, very clear, Virginie. So Philippe also wanted to add something.
Really short, it's an information coming back to what Ignacy was saying. Just to tell you, we will organize a series of webinars in February and March as EJEC, and on 23rd of February is on licensing, permitting, and environmental impact assessment guidelines. Exchange of best practices from all over Europe, so you are all invited to a series of workshops, and notably on licensing, permitting, regulation.
So thank you very, very much, Philippe, for this note. Jean-Jacques, also.
Oui, je voulais juste compléter. Pour l'avoir beaucoup pratiqué, je pense qu'avec les évolutions de la réglementation du code minier en France, je pense qu'on a aujourd'hui les outils pour développer des projets. Donc, je ne pense pas que la partie législation soit un obstacle. On l'a fait vraiment en étroite coopération avec le ministère, et je pense que le résultat est plutôt aujourd'hui bon pour toute la filière, pour développer les projets. Et pour développer les projets, pour développer les expertises, il faut augmenter le nombre de projets, tout simplement. Et pour ça, donc, comme je le disais avant, il faut réfléchir aussi à un grand développement de la géothermie industrielle, et on a eu déjà quelques réflexions en interne et avec l'ADEME. On a aujourd'hui un très bon mécanisme de garantie du risque qu'on veut étendre au-delà du Dogger, mais pourquoi pas travailler sur une garantie du risque commercial. Donc, par exemple, un opérateur qui voudrait se lancer pour alimenter des utilisations comme des serres maraîchères et d'autres applications, on pourrait peut-être sécuriser ce risque-là pendant quelques années en lui disant, voilà, pendant quelques années, pendant 5 ans par exemple, on va garantir une rentabilité de ton opération, mais aussi avec les élus, voir comment ramener d'autres clients et développer justement cette partie industrielle. Donc, ça serait quelque part faire preuve un peu de créativité pour trouver des outils de garantie du risque d'enlèvement de la chaleur, du risque commercial. Voilà quelques pistes pour développer les projets et donc forcément développer l'expertise, puisque plus il y aura de projets, plus il y aura d'expertise.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the delay. I have to switch devices to keep the translation going. So I think that we are reaching the the end of today's session. I really think that this has been very successful. I think that technologically we made it, which is already amazing. I mean, this was we were not extremely optimistic towards it some time ago. So I think that it's great that we have the technologies now to be able to have a multi-language event such as today, be able to convey people from many places simultaneously, have live contributions from all of you. I want to thank also the interpreters today. They are having a very hard job trying to translate the very technical terms that we are using in today's meeting. It's not an easy task, so we should also thank them. They did an excellent job today. So I just wanted to thank again all the organizing committee, the chair for, let's say, for half of today's session, Emmanuel, who did also a great job. All the panelists and all the contributions that we had from the attendees have been excellent, and I enjoyed this event very much. Remember that tomorrow at 9:30 we have the follow-up. We're going to go now more into the local scale of the problem. Same format. We will have as chairs Margarita de Gregorio and Emmanuel Robbins again. We will have lightning talks, roundtable discussions. So hopefully I will see all of you there tomorrow, and I believe that this will be as useful, as fruitful as today has been. So thank you very, very much, and hope to see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day.